afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the July 11th episode of Security Data Operations. This is our bi-monthly stream where we talk about all things security operations, data operations, and the convergence of the two in the modern day cybersecurity team. My name, as always, is Neal Bridges. I did have to attend some meetings today, and they did confirm for me my name, so I am aware of my name today. It is correct. Looks like I didn't forget to turn the mic off mute. Looks like everything's streaming appropriately. Love it when things, knock on wood, go together. We are streaming live across LinkedIn, Twitch, X, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, we're all the platforms. If you catch us on any of the platforms, thank you very much for tuning in. We absolutely love it. As I mentioned, this is our bi-monthly stream. Thank you for tuning in. Let's hit the rules super fast before I introduce my guest host for today. You know me, I absolutely, love that we've got guests coming on. But let's hit some rules really quick before we introduce them. There is no toxicity in chat whatsoever. Now, what does that mean, right? That means no racist, sexist, misogynistic, elitist, or otherwise toxic behavior in chat. We do have mods in chat. Please give a huge shout out and clappy hands for the mods. I absolutely love all of our mods, and they do, do a great job of keeping us all safe and secure. Mods are here to keep chat free of all that behavior that I just kind of talked about. We have mods that will make no qualms out of utilizing that ban button. Mods are not here, however, to stifle chat in any way, which kind of leads us over to the second rule, right? Second rule is more of a reminder than it is anything else. We love questions. If you saw the LinkedIn post today, tried to get questions ahead of the stream because we always end up with a ton of questions. One of the values that comes from any of our streams being live is that you get access to real expert professionals. John's an expert. Trust me when I say John's an expert. You'll see here in a little bit, right? You'll get access to expert professionals where you can ask questions live on stream. That's a rarity. Most of the time you don't get to ask those questions, and so we highly welcome and encourage questions all the time throughout the entirety of the stream. So instead of waiting for a dedicated Q&A at the end, this way we can have an interactive conversation. If we talk about something that's particularly interesting to you, drop it into chat and a mod will grab it and push it onto the screen so that we can talk about it together. Panzer, so glad to know that you are pumped. Everybody else who's in here, hopefully you're as pumped as I am. Super excited to introduce my guest for today. So put your hands together across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and X for my good friend. My good friend. I use that word friend loosely, I know, John, but my good friend, John Moore. John, welcome to the SecDataOps stream. How are you doing, sir?
Good, Neal. Good to see you, man. Good to talk to you again.
Good to see you, too. It has been a while. It's been too long. You still look like you have most of your hair, so I see that the CISO role not putting too much wear on you.
I don't know. It's all white now. Does that count? I haven't pulled it out, but it has changed colors.
You haven't pulled it out. You haven't lost it. It doesn't seem like the board has made you like start to sit in the corner and pluck it out. So I think you're doing all right. Yeah. Let me brag a little bit about you and your career for the audience really quick so they can kind of understand where you came from, right? Now, you are currently CISO for a global company called ALS, business operations well over 60 countries. And I take this opportunity to remind people that you're here on your personal capacity, and any of the opinions you share are your personal opinions and don't reflect the opinions of your employer. Is that fair?
Yeah, my legal will be happy with that statement.
I figured they would. I figured that's how we keep you coming back, is by keeping you employed. But prior to that, and this is where I met you, you were CISO at MRC Global, which is another global supply chain company that works a lot in critical infrastructure and oil and gas. But you also did some community work as the president of Secure West Virginia, and you ran that conference for a number of years. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. It was actually one of the founding members of the 304 Geeks, which is a nonprofit which puts on the Secure West Virginia, what used to be called HackerCon. So that's in its, is it 14th year?
Yeah.
14th year. I stepped off the board when I became a CISO. I just lost the time. Running a conference is hard. So if you're out there and you're attending conferences and you're not volunteering, volunteer. Help these guys out and gals out. It's hard. It's way harder than it looks.
It is way harder than it looks. We do have a little bit of a section. I do want to talk about that. I have a section on your work at Secure West Virginia and conference running. So we'll table that a little bit to the end. I also want to highlight, and we had a good chat about this in the green room prior to the stream start. Like me, you're a fellow Jeeper. Congrats on your money pit. Do you still have your Jeep?
I got another Jeep, actually.
You got another Jeep. One wasn't good enough. But
I got rid of the first one and got a better one.
Okay. But John, you're also an avid video gamer, right? You still playing World of Warcraft and Diablo 4?
Still playing. That's where you take out your frustrations. Right?
That's where you take out your frustrations. When the board tells you like you're not articulating risk enough, you just go, have a tune killed in hardcore Diablo, right?
Yeah, let's not bring that up. It's too soon.
Now, John, the reason I'm excited to have you here is because, like me, you are a CISO that values still being able to keep your hands on the keyboard when it comes. You love to get tactical and technical. You love to be informed. How have you been able to successfully do that as you've transitioned through the ranks as a CISO?
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, that's a tough question. How do you keep tactically and technically knowledgeable when your day-to-day responsibilities are more layers 8 and 9, the people and the policies?
Yeah.
And it's tough, right? So some of my hobbies, right? So I do my own thing. I have a llama here on my home box, trying to play with AI, trying to play with the data sets, trying to do that in my own time so that I understand when I go into a board meeting and they start asking me questions, I understand the technical piece of it. And it's interesting to me because I'll go into sales calls, and you've been on numerous sales calls, Neal. The vast majority of CISOs aren't really all that technical.
No.
And when they run into me and they start doing something super high level that's inaccurate, I crush them.
Ooh.
And they're not accustomed to that. They're not accustomed to asking, the CISO, what firewalls are you running, or how are you doing your BGP redistribution? And I can answer those questions, and they get a little antsy because suddenly the smoke and mirrors they're accustomed to throwing up to get around difficult questions don't work, because I will absolutely drill into them.
Do you find that your role as CISO, when you look at your peers, is better because you're technically informed? Do you think that more CISOs need to be technically informed?
I think more CISOs need to be technically informed. And I say that, but I also will tell you that we need to stop looking at the business. We describe it as IT and the business. We start out with an adversarial description. We're all part of the business. We need to be partners across that. There are more CISOs who are technical who need to be more business-minded, and the business-minded people need to actually understand at least some of the technology.
There you go. I love it. That wasn't the question that I wanted to kick off with, but I did want to kind of dive down that because it is something I do love about you. The question that I did have for you to kick this off, right, is really about your career. And I want you to talk to the audience about how you landed your first CISO role.
Well, how far back we want to go? I'm atypical. Let me start there. So when people talk about their path into cybersecurity, I quit high school at 17 to pursue a music career. That didn't work out. I went to college. I got my GED and went to college with my then girlfriend, now wife of 31 years. And quit college to put her through graduate school and got a job at SAIC out of college. Yeah. And did systems administration. I was a Unix admin for AIX 3.2.5. Yes, I'm that old. And that just transitioned, right? I kept doing IT work. I finally ended up at MRC Global as a security operations lead. After I went to the state of West Virginia at one point, I built their security operations center, refined it, not really built it, and went to MRC Global. And there was an outsourcing initiative, and all these people started leaving because they didn't want to do the outsourcing, right? And that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
And I ended up being the CISO there for almost 2 years, and it was an educational experience. I learned a lot, but trial by fire. I was CISO like 2 weeks, and Colonial Pipeline hit.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting, I get a phone call on a Thursday. It's like, we need you in Houston on Tuesday. I'm like, yes, sir. So I'm sitting with the CEO on a Tuesday explaining how did it happen? What do we know? Who did it? How do we prevent it from happening here?
And you said you were, what, 3 weeks on the job?
Yeah, it was the first month.
Yeah, within the first month of you being CISO at MRC.
Yeah. So we had, and MRC did a lot of global work, not quite as large as this organization in terms of footprint, but their customers were all, the major oil companies and gas companies and utilities and chemical manufacturing. All of those critical infrastructure things come with critical infrastructure requirements. And they're all really hard. And you talk about, I think we talked about this earlier. That all comes with data requirements. Yeah. What are you going to do with my data? Who has it? Who has access to it? Who can see it? Who can't? And then, and then you start outsourcing things, and it gets even more complicated. Processing agreements and so on and so forth. So that was my first CISO arrangement.
So I'll bring that up because, like, I think your history is important for people to hear, right? Like, I mean, CISOs come from all walks of life, but I mean, you were barely ready to jump into that role as CISO, but you came in, you conquered, you did a fantastic job, and obviously you were successful at MRC. Let's take a trip back in time, back to your West Virginia Office of Technology days, where you said you inherited the SOC, you managed the Security Operations Center for them. It was like 2015 to 2018. At that time, how big of a problem was the data problem that we see in cybersecurity today?
We didn't recognize it then as the problem it is today. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't a problem, because I think it was. And I think GDPR came out around the time I was in the Security Operations Center there. And GDPR put this data, because it wasn't, and people looked at it, they're like, oh, that's a European rule, but it's not. It's a European citizen rule. We have European citizens on the network. We have to protect their data the way we would there. And that information, that data piece, so what a lot of stuff we did was law enforcement. We did investigations, illegal content, and some of that. That's not, you have to be super careful with that, right? So we had all these containerization rules about where this could go, where that could go, but we didn't have a structured approach to it. And understand I had 117 agencies in that environment, give or take. We were the entire executive branch, the IT department for the entire executive branch of government here. And that, everybody's got their own rules. That's part of the thing that I did there, was refine that into, let's get to one set of security operation rules, one set of firewalls, one set of rules, one set of data processing requirements, so we know what we're looking for. What does bad look like? And what does inappropriate access look like? Because we couldn't really tell you when I started.
So with that in mind, then, when you talk about, like, what does bad look like, how did you leverage kind of the, an operational construct around that threat data to enhance your incident response capabilities, enhance your security operations capability? How did you use that data around threat intelligence to kind of enhance that?
Well, we started really with visibility, right? We put in new firewalls that we actually put in non-blocking mode. We wanted to see everything. I want to see all of it before we make decisions. And the first rule wasn't blocking inbound traffic. It was blocking outbound traffic. If a malicious beacon was coming inbound in a response to something we had sent out, we wanted to know about it. And we wanted to know what data was traversing the network. So we had to turn up a bunch of and in the US, it's easier to do than other places in the world. Turned up SSL inspection. We turned up blocking of non-standard ports. We started investigating what was happening on network versus what was supposed to be happening. And when we started turning those things on, when you start turning on FTP on non-standard ports, when you start catching stuff, you start breaking financial applications which are poorly programmed. I'll say.
Back to the business conversation we were having before.
Right, because the guy who wrote that program wasn't necessarily a technical person. He doesn't realize that port 81 isn't meant for HTTP traffic. It was just the next port that logically made sense to him because 80 was HTTP and 81's next. So yeah, we get that a lot. But that was the first port. Try to figure out, what are we doing? What is the government agencies? What are they doing with data? Where does it live, and who is accessing it? And then once you have a better picture of the who, what, why. Well, actually, once you know who and what, you start asking why. Mm-hmm. And the why is where we started getting, I guess, good traction. Who needs access to that? Why do they need access to that? And can we restrict it?
And how did you gain visibility of that data? What tools, and you don't have to cite vendors specifically, right? But when you think about the architecture of that, what tools allowed you to see that data picture as a whole?
We used a lot of the Microsoft tooling, as most state government does, because you get that for free. Microsoft free.
Microsoft free, yeah.
But yeah, our firewalls and our endpoint protection and DLP packages, those are the things that we started utilizing to gain visibility into data flow. And then at the state, we weren't involved directly in the DLP at the agency levels. But in subsequent labs, I have used DLP on the endpoint and at the server level to gain access into, or I guess visibility into, what lives where. So when we do those data requests and integrations, one of the first questions we ask, data flow, data map, what's the classification, what are the requirements, right? So what are you moving? Is it personally identifiable? Is it financial? What are we transferring here? And why isn't it encrypted? What's your favorite food? Why is it pizza?
Wait. Are you saying that it was not encrypted by default?
I'm saying you will find surprising things if you look close enough.
West Virginia Office of Technology, if you're listening, it's okay.
That's not encrypted now, I bet, because it won't trap anymore.
And you mentioned something, I think, at the beginning of this as we started talking about this, right? You didn't understand the importance of data. As you look back on that experience with what you know now, how big of a data problem did you have?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't think I appreciated the data problems that we were having. In retrospect, hindsight's 2020. There are a bunch of things that we probably could have done better at the state of West Virginia when I was there, that I could have done better in identifying sensitive information and in putting the right controls around that sensitive information. So I was over the ops team. Another person was over governance and compliance. She was very good at that function. And we worked really well together. That's the other thing that I think is super important in this. I would find something and take it to her and be like, hey, we don't know what this is, but we know that it's wrong. Can we talk to somebody to get this fixed? I should have fostered that relationship more. We should have done that more often. We probably should have had a regular cadence. Today, I have a regular cadence with compliance. I have a monthly meeting with compliance. This is what we've seen. This is what we need to do. These are the regulations coming down in the future. So in retrospect, I didn't have that engagement that I probably needed to have.
What stopped you from having that? Was it ignorance, or was it, were you too busy fighting fires? Like, what stopped you from having that type of cross team collaboration?
I think it's almost exclusively tasking, right? Task saturation at that level. Because there was a lot of chaos. We did 72 forensic investigations in 1 year. Oof. And I had a team of 6 people.
That's at least one. That's at least one forensic investigation a week, more.
Or more. Yeah. And some of those were criminal investigations. Some of those were child exploitation. There was 2 federal grand jury investigations. There's all these digital things that we had to produce. Because remember, every state library education system, we had visibility into all of these public Wi-Fi networks, and anything somebody would do on a public Wi-Fi network, we could potentially have to investigate. Yeah. And so, that scope, that creep was really, really broad.
That task saturation is something I can relate. I don't think people realize, like, in that defensive side of things, task saturation, that's a very real problem. Like, there's a lot going, especially on, I think it's important to say, and tell me if you agree with me on this or not, right? In well-run security operations team, task saturation is a very real problem.
Yes, I'll agree, because the more you see, the more there is to do.
That's right.
And the more policies you have that restrict or constrain data, the more tasks you're going to have in tickets.
That's right. I wanted to put a really fine point on that, because like I think that I hear horror stories to this day, and I have before in the past. Like I can remember, I think I can talk about this. Like, you know, when I was working at Abbott and we were going to acquire St. Jude Medical, and we did our kind of like, you know, pre day one, trying to get to know the security ops team that I was going to be inheriting and things like that. And I asked them, I said, well, how many incidents do you deal with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And they said, yeah, we probably deal with about 5 on a weekly basis. I think everybody on my team got this like type of feeling, because it was like, oh my God, what are you not seeing?
Right. Yeah. That's funny. I do 250 a month.
Yeah. I think we got to a point where we were doing a couple hundred a day after we got everything put back in place. And again, I think John makes a really good point here that I want Chad to take away from. The more you see, the more data you have access to, the better your security operations team can run.
And I would add to that, though, there's a role now for automation that we didn't have at the time. So I run 2,500 to 3,000 as incidents a month, but only 200 or so get escalated to the point of human eyes investigating them further, right? And that's 4-ish a day. There are 22 working days in a month on average, right? Yeah. So we usually do that. And it's pretty consistent. When we see spikes, you see the lull in the summer because all the attackers are taking vacation like the rest of us.
And then you see the spike. You see the spike at Christmas because everybody's on vacation.
Right.
Except for you.
So we expect those things. Yeah. And plan for them. But automation has been really helpful in our SIEM tool, the SOAR platforms, to help us get to a point where we are not. Well, I'm going to say we are task saturated, but it's not all operations tasks. Yeah. We also have the tickets on the back end that we're doing for whitelisting or for special access or whatever that happens to be. Because when you're running security operations correctly, the security team sees all of these things and has to review all of these things. And from a regulatory perspective, it all has to be auditable. Yeah. Who approved Neal's access to Exchange as an administrator? And do you have documentation to show that? So that's part of the challenge. When you're doing it right, it's harder, I should say.
Let's leave West Virginia Office of Technology for a second. Let's go to MRC Global, right? You got thrown in. There was a lot of education by fire. You kind of moved out of that security operations space. You were in it for a little while, and then you took over as CISO for a while. How did your lessons learned from West Virginia Office of Technology, how did they inform your operations of the SOC at MRC Global?
It's that's a good question. Entirely different environments, right? So state government is one level of authority and expectation. Private sector is different. Publicly traded private sector, Fortune 500, different still. Because now you have greater reporting requirements. If you're in a publicly traded company today, you have SOX as well as SEC reporting requirements on cybersecurity. Those weren't in effect when I was at MRC Global, but they were in draft, so we knew about them. I worked on them. The thing that I think I took from the prior position, though, was the communications that I had to have with executives. It's the cabinet secretaries of a state agency. It's the director of an agency or department of an agency head. Those individuals don't necessarily understand what it is I'm talking about. How do I explain it to them in terms that they can grasp and make educated decisions? That's the thing that is probably that separates CISOs from SOC managers a lot of times in the operation spaces. Can you explain it to someone who doesn't do it for a living? Because we have a different vocabulary than regular people, but I think that's true of all technical domains. Probably non-technical domains.
What was some of your biggest initial challenges? Like I can imagine like those first sets of meetings is you have this idea in your head about how you should be communicating with these people. What was kind of that first crash and burn like for you when you went to go talk to them?
Value propositions. State government, I didn't have to do value proposition. I had a budget or a goal, and I had to go get it. In the private sector, why? What value does it bring? What's the return on investment? How does doing something slower make us more money? Or, whatever that happens to be. And it's trying to define that. Why is this data important? How are we going to do it? And one of the things that I think I took out of it, because it's constant education, right? We had a data officer at the time. He was big into infonomics. So we did a lot of infonomics evaluations. We actually looked at the data. And that was beneficial. But I think that was probably one of my key challenges, just trying to find the value proposition in data and security, specifically security ops. Because most of our stuff was outsourced, right? I had multiple vendors I had to deal with. How do you get all of those third-party processors? How do you get value out of that back to the board? How do you show value?
I want to pivot on you because you bring up the third-party one. I think this is an awesome segue about third parties. When I first started talking to you back when you were at MRC Global, one of the problems that you explained to me that you were dealing with pretty constantly was you didn't know what your third parties were doing from a security perspective. You didn't have visibility into the same areas that they had visibility into. You couldn't investigate the same way that your third parties were able to. Can you kind of talk through kind of how that conversation went down with us and what some of the challenges you were trying to understand from a security perspective, what your third parties were seeing from an incident response and security operations perspective, and what you lacked in that area?
Yeah, so and let me preface that with this statement. Every CISO thinks they can do it better.
That is a true statement.
What's the Fallout quote? War never changes. CISOs never change either. Because every CISO has a vision of how they want something to be done. And you hire a new CISO and they come in and be like, oh, that person was an idiot. This is not how it works. And you retool it. So one of the problems I had was I inherited a bunch of things that weren't mine. When I was in the operations side. And when I started in the operations side of MRC, I was like, well, this doesn't make sense because I can't see what the vendor is seeing. Because they had a customer portal and then they had their SIEM portal, which was different. They had better data. I got the sanitized management version at the end of the day. And well, you know me, I want the technical pieces. I want to know who, what, when, why, what was the process, how was it executed, where. I needed that level of detail, and I just didn't have it. So that was the struggle, and it was getting technical details for a team that I had started to build internally to actually do threat hunting, to actually do incident response, to not just be reliant on the third parties. Because sometimes, SLAs are great, but they get violated.
No, say it ain't so.
I know, it's weird. And that credit on my account doesn't help if I got breached and they pivoted in 30 minutes or less, right? That's not going to help. That's not going to offset my cyber insurance.
So what was particularly challenging when you would get that, that notification from that MDR, that MSSP? Did you have to go find your credentials for the tools? Did you have to figure out where the indicator was in that tool set? Walk through kind of what was some of the chaos that ensued when you got that inevitable, hey, we see something, and now you had to go try to figure out what it was that they saw.
Yeah, and you've probably heard me say MDR is more like MDN. It's more like managed detection and notification. They don't actually do much response in a lot of these tools. So what we'd get an email that said, we have this event that's taking place on this device. And it would have a general layer of detail: source, destination, activity, whatever the indicator was, a phishing email was clicked, whatever. And then we would have to go investigate the account, the computer, and we all had disparate tools. So we'd end up going to the endpoint protection package, which I don't want to out all the tools that they were using at the time, but we'd go to that package and look at the endpoint. Then we'd have to go to the web package to look at the mail and see what the links were. Go to the web proxy to look at that. So we had all these disparate tools doing different pieces of the puzzle, but no unified view. Even though we had a SIEM, no unified view.
Well, hold on. You had a SIEM, but you still didn't have a unified view?
Correct, because not all the data was being ingested because of the cost of the ingestion. when you have a web proxy and 4,000 users, you do about 6,000 web entries per minute. That data adds up pretty quick, and you don't know what you need and what you don't.
I think
that becomes the struggle.
I think this gets back to a stream we had, like, I think 3 or 4 streams ago, where we talked about SIM is dead, but, long live SIM, right? Like SIM is still very much a part of our security architectures on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, we know that challenges constantly exist with SIM.
And I would add to that, not only is it, long live the SIM, it's regulatorily required.
Yeah.
Depending on certain jurisdictions, you have to have logs aggregated. That's literally the compliance requirement.
Yeah.
Now, there's some leeway there in what you have to put in it. But, investigation data, I don't know what's important today. Right? If you're using a web proxy, your Zscalers, your Netscopes, your whatever, there's a lot of data there that's coming in about activities. What's useful? Well, I don't know, because I don't know what's bad. If we don't know the URL's bad, then you accessed it. Well, it doesn't help if I only collect the blocked.
Yeah.
What use is that?
Yeah.
So that disconnect is really hard to manage. And now I have 21,000 users and 380 locations worldwide in 70 countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't.
Let's pick on that a little bit, right? Because at MRC Global, you did lead the cloud migration and SaaS implementation efforts at MRC Global. How did that change your data picture? What were some of the challenges and best practices you had in aligning security operations with expanding into cloud and into a lot of those SaaS technologies?
Consolidation of tools into one unified visibility portal. Pick one vendor. Try to go all in where it makes sense. Find their gaps. Every vendor has a gap you're going to have to augment, and try to fill that gap with a third party or a spot point solution. That was really critical to get everything in one place, to get all of the management in one place. And then changing the outsourcing companies created some challenges of their own, right? Because then you have to build everything back from scratch, every incident response plan. But yeah, that was probably the key hurdle, getting that selection and then getting all the data into one place and getting the appropriate level of visibility for the IT teams. That was you heard me say it earlier, I don't like the adversarial approach.
Yeah.
We talk about the business like the business is the boogeyman. It's not. And IT is the same. Security and IT at MRC Global are actually separate entities. Security reported to legal, IT reported to CFO. So my seat was actually not in IT. I audited IT. That created a more of I want to say some friction at times, but a better partnership because they had to come get approval. They couldn't tell me what they were going to do.
I want to go back.
When we did the data migration, I think that helped.
I want to go back to your one tool thing because I want to play the devil's advocate on this, right? There's I hear you. But what about vendor lock-in? What about best of breed versus best of class, right? What about all these arguments that say you shouldn't have one vendor? What was kind of your take on that as you were going through this challenge?
Best of breed just leaves you with a dogfight in the ring at the end of the day because none of the tools get along well enough. And I see Gartner talk about security mesh, and that is a utopia. I have no expectation that ever.
Really?
Because look at the vendors, how well they don't get along today, and we expect that to change. So I could have CrowdStrike EDR and Microsoft this and Zscaler that, and they all share and talk to each other. Who owns that connection? Because everybody's going to want to bill me for something. And that's just the cynic, jaded side of security.
Yeah, but this is one of the reasons why I love to chat with you. You share my cynicism very much. But what if, you say that, if you take off your cynic hat for a second, isn't that what you do want out of security, though? You want to be able to have access to the data that exists in each of those vendor platforms. You just don't want to be locked into their subpar solutions to get there?
Correct. That is the perfect, I guess, outcome. One of the reasons that I selected the SIM that we have today here, I didn't want the vendor to own the data. I own the data. I own the SIM. I pick who runs the administration sitting on top of it. I can outsource that to whomever I want. but I own the SIM and I own the data. I ultimately pay for the storage. I don't have to worry about that piece. I just have to budget it. It's a different equation. But yes, I mean, ultimately, you would love for your vendors to get along well enough to understand that they don't do everything well. But nobody understands that they don't do everything well.
They got to get that market share, baby. They got to get that market share.
Right? If you're not market leader in a category, create a new category. In that. That's how it works.
That's definitely honestly, like I can empathize with you, right? Because I'm the same way on XDR, right? Like, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before in the past, right? Is XDR was what all of the SIEM and NDR vendors were supposed to be doing in the first place, right? But now we've had to create a new category for everybody to be a part of it. Yeah. Speaking,
Listen, go ahead. Like you said, though, or I think that's what we ultimately want. We would love for them to work that way.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening in my future.
I think we might be closer than you realize. I'm becoming less of a cynic in this space. Let's move on to a little bit more recently at ALS where you're at now, and I'm gonna ask some questions. Obviously blanket statement, right? Answer what you're comfortable with, and I'll try to keep these questions broad so that I'll try to help you stay safe on this one. Given ALS's emphasis on sustainability and digital transformation, obviously all these questions that I've got were derived from public information. None of this was derived from conversations between John and I just want to preface that as well for people who are listening. But given ALS's emphasis on sustainability and digital transformation, can you share how the intersection of security operations and data operations has played a role in supporting these initiatives, particularly in terms of data integrity and security compliance?
Well, so ALS is a laboratory company.
Yeah.
Data integrity is paramount, right? We are literally testing and providing results to our customers, and nothing is more important than accuracy of that information. So we take that very seriously. How do I play a role in that? Well, it's about access control to the data, encryption of the data in transit and at rest. It's about being compliant. And when we have 71 plus business entities in our annual report, those are individual entities or business units around the world because we grow through M&A in a lot of places. That creates different ERPs, different data sets, different data residency requirements. I have a whole series of spreadsheets. I know. I was always the guy who was like, spreadsheets aren't a database. You shouldn't use them that way. Guess what I use as a database? To try to keep track of who owns what. Where does it live? What are my regulatory requirements? Who's my point of contact? Do I have notification clause requirements? There are a lot of pieces to that today. And we acquired 2 companies in Europe recently that just dialed all of that up to 11. Germany is really hard. Their GDPR rules are much tighter.
I was gonna ask you. I do have a very specific question about that, right? Because of all your acquisition expansion efforts, there's got to be access to data has got to be just crazy for you. And so how, you talk about spreadsheets, tracking at the tactical level, but strategically, how has that data diversity, how's that changed your strategy going into ALS?
I used to scoff at the zero trust models and whatnot.
I still scoff at it.
But I understand now the goal perhaps better, or the implementation of how you can do that. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. And we're not 100%, right? It's about how do we enable access from disparate systems securely. And you come down to, and I hate to say zero trust, you come down to user-based access requests. And how do we do that?
Give an example of that, if you can, just for folks to understand like what you're talking about with that.
We acquire a company and they come with their own ERP, their own laboratory software, their own set of customers and processes. Well, first thing we got to not do is break their environment, but we need to integrate them into our environment so we can migrate. So I need to maintain that piece without disrupting the business. The way that I do that today, or try to do that today, is that we isolate them on their own VLAN basically, and we keep them autonomous. And we integrate that to us, but that's where we start applying zero trust. We don't trust inherently both directions, right? We have to do a compromise assessment. We have to look at the data sources. We have to understand what do they have. We have to implement our security tools and our security stack. And once they get our security stack in place, well, now I can start opening up their access because I know that their machine is safe. The user account is valid and MFA'd. Now I start giving them access to the web portals. And that's how we start controlling and applying that zero trust model. It's zero trust is just user-based access control. I mean, it's not new words, concepts. It's the same stuff we've always been doing. It's AAA, but done at the endpoint level instead of at the central level. Access, and I say AAA because I'm old. Authentication, access, and authorization. Right. Those are the things that we do, right? I still look at it as who are you? What do you want to do? And are you authorized to do it? And my team, security, doesn't need access to financials. Why should we ever access an accounting server? We shouldn't. So we start building those containers around that, or VLANs, containerization, whatever it happens to be for that particular technology. And then we end up with, not everybody follows the same set of rules. We end up with legacy access. You end up having to containerize things or put them into other compartments so that you can securely access it when it wasn't ever meant to be securely accessed. And it's an interesting challenge.
I love that, and I love the question that came below, right? Please expand on zero trust as it's really getting pushed. I think I share with John this feeling, right, when we talk about XDR, when we talk about zero trust, when we talk about some of the things that get pushed, like John's cynicism is rooted in fact, right? A lot of companies need money, and to make money, they have to create categories with Gartner because most uneducated CIOs and some CISOs and other technology leaders will look and say, well, I only want what's in the upper right of Gartner because obviously Gartner, being an expert, has said that those are the best solutions, and thus we end up with categories like XDR and zero trust and things like that. But what you just heard John explain, and what I think you make a really good point of, John, is that you took the theory, you took the academic paper behind zero trust, and you said, how does this really work in my environment with my controls, with the data that I have to protect, and how do I apply that in a practical matter?
And my favorite example, and it's probably easier to wrap your mind around, is SD-WAN. What is SD-WAN? Software-defined wide area network is a policy-based route.
Yeah.
That's all it is. They'll put pretty interfaces around it. They'll put other stuff into it. They'll try to make it. It's just a policy-based route. If condition is true, go here. Now, from a security perspective, there's a lot of advantages to that. I can route traffic different places on demand. I can make my network and our security apparatus more malleable to a particular instance, right? If an accountant is traveling and we don't generally have an accountant at that site, well, they can still get to their network because of the SD-WAN capabilities, right? Like, oh, John's allowed to access the SIM from anywhere. Go ahead and open up this tunnel. Yeah, there are advantages to it, but it's really it's marketing on top of things that we already should be doing, at least at some level. Now, don't get me wrong; some of them are amazingly useful and automated and all that. But when you boil it down, zero trust is you're just pushing the security authentication to the endpoint. That's really all we're doing. We're moving it out because we don't have walls anymore. It used to be easy. We had walls.
We had walls. We had data centers. We had offices, and you had to drive to them.
Right. Now we don't. So we have to come up with other ways that Neal is Neal and John is John, and they're.
And I think this is good. I think we're cynical. I want people to understand, right? We're cynical because it's the same thing we've been preaching for decades, right? It's not new solutions to new problems. It's not even new solutions to old problems. It's the same old problems that require the same old solutions. We've just failed at getting them right over the years.
One year at HackerCon at Secure West Virginia, I put up a video on loop on my computer. It was called The Computer Chronicles. It was an old PBS public access TV show in your typical bad 70s suits and ties, and they were talking about computer security in 1984. The conversation could have been last week if you just added zeros to the dollar figures.
Wow.
It was about passwords and war dialing and
yeah.
I was like, are you serious? We've been saying the same things for 40 years, and it's still the same problems.
Well, as you know, John, the title of the show is SecDataOps, so I have to ask a SecDataOps question. And we talked a little bit about this in the green room as well, right? So I want to ask you, how do you leverage SecDataOps to manage and secure the influx of new data and to ensure seamless integration with existing systems?
It's a tough question. But isn't the data, the SecDataOps, isn't that the cybers we're trying to protect to begin with? Isn't the data the core of what we're trying to do? And I think...
Good.
I think the whole point... Well, I think we had that conversation briefly. I don't see anything new in the approach other than it's a new vehicle to get stakeholder engagement. It's an easier way to define, and I get some in the lead up to this discussion, right? I did some pre-reading. I didn't see anything necessarily new, but what I saw was a different way to present it. When we talk about the integrations and the analysis of data, when we start putting that into business terms and into terms of risk, it's a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, but you're focusing on the lowest level, which is the data, which is probably wise at the end of the day, to be honest. But isn't that what we were supposed to be doing anyway? I think sometimes our vantage point shifts to what we can do instead of what we should be doing.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think that is the nature of SecDataOps, right? Is data has... I would contest on top of what you said, right? That data has always been the central focus of security teams. That's the reason why we've got GDPR and CCPA, and not just from a regulatory perspective, but also to your points earlier about West Virginia Office of Technology and yada yada yada. You needed more data to do your job at security operations, and so data has become so central. But we've been focused on this technology and that technology and zero trust and XDR and blah, 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 blah. But we've lost focus on not just the data, but the growing data environment that's happening around us. Like, wouldn't you agree that like the amount of data that we have to secure in our own individual companies, let alone as a cybersecurity industry, far outweighs anything we've ever seen in our entire careers, and probably will do nothing but get larger?
And growing exponentially. Yeah. And the data sets that we have in this environment are staggering to me. In one of my prior jobs, I worked with a DoD agency. The data, we had 20 plus petabytes of data. And that was 15 years ago. I can't imagine what they have today. When we look at the data, in data classification, data tagging, you look at the explosion of AI. What does AI live on? It lives on data. But now that data is being aggregated and derived to provide something else. Well, who owns that new piece? And how do we tag that now? Because that's been processed and manipulated by non-human. How do you tag that? That's a new regulatory requirement that I have to manage too, right? The EU AI laws. So there's a lot of that stuff that's currently, I'm going to say nebulous. There are a lot of gray areas in what do we do with this data? Who owns it? Who uses it?
How do we use it for cybersecurity operations? How do we inform our defense systems? Like, not just on the customer side, but how do you use that data on the defensive side?
And who's access? The who, what, why questions are still valid. Yeah. But now you have to ask them in real time across much larger data sets, and the risk is much higher. Because data is not going anywhere, and it's going to keep getting broader and broader in terms of scope, as will the regulations. That's the unfortunate reality. Until we get to that critical mass point where we have a global, or at least agreed upon standards at the global level it's just going to keep getting worse. I mean, I look at it, and people look at GDPR like, oh my God, look at GDPR, it's hard. And I'm like, what's harder is 50 states that don't have anything in common.
Yes. 50 different state requirements on privacy and data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll throw the question out there: who regulates biometric data? One state. We had time clocks that had fingerprint readers.
Oh.
Guess where we didn't deploy them?
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one state.
That one state.
I was like, no way.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try that.
Yeah. All right. Let's. We got a few minutes to go. I want to be respectful of your time, John, because you did say you had a hard stop, and I want to be super respectful of it. Reminder to everybody to get the questions in before we wrap up, just in case there are any questions that want to come across any of the platforms. We are watching for those. I want to talk about Secure West Virginia. I want to talk about your community efforts before we wrap up. You were president of Secure West Virginia, 304 Geeks. Can you talk a little bit about the different types of initiatives that you spearheaded to foster community involvement in cybersecurity?
Oh, man, that's a great topic. One of the things I think I'm most proud of with Secure West Virginia is reaching out to college students and to non-traditional people. We always talk about this cybersecurity shortage in staff, and I kind of push back on that. I don't agree. I think we have a shortage of unicorns, of perfect people, but there are lots of people with interest and aptitude, and I think it's getting the right vocabulary, getting the right components in place, and giving a safe place for people to try. I don't like some of the industry's mantras and obnoxiousness around, and we've had that conversation, so I'll shut up there. But we did a CTF, and that was one of our favorite things to do because it wasn't necessarily as competitive as some of the other conferences, because we would literally go around and help people. How do you do this? How do you get this flag? How do I breach this Windows system? And show them, because hands-on experience coming from a guy who didn't, get college education around cybersecurity is a way better teacher, right? Get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
We had a company came in and did soldering, and it was always interesting to me to watch all kinds of different people from different walks of life do soldering, learn how to solder, and then why is that important? How do you use that in a security space? Well, now you understand how to bypass security on an elevator, or how to do this to an entry door system. There's all this other overlap that until you really start digging into it and putting your hands on it, might not be apparent.
Yeah.
Lock picking. I watched a mom pick a lock once.
A mom picked a lock. Yeah.
Yeah. She was at the picking, and she picked it, and the look on her face was priceless.
Yeah.
Because she just looked like, oh my God, I did it. And I was like, do it again. And she locked it. And now, once you do it once, man, you know what happens? It just comes on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. I think it's also important. Like, yes, let's not discount the impact that you've had on folks trying to break into cyber and young minds and moms and, folks who are trying to get into this industry. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the impacts that type of philanthropy and experience with working with groups like that had on your professional growth. What would you say the biggest impact that it had on how you approach cybersecurity in your corporate role was?
I mean, I wasn't in security when we founded Secure West Virginia or to Hacker 304 Geeks and HackerCon. I was actually the director of IT at a law firm. So that was security adjacent. But because I did forensics, I did those things, but security was just a part of my daily function, wasn't my whole job. But when I got into the Secure West Virginia, one of the first keynote speakers was Dave Kennedy. Dave, being who he is, just a super nice guy. We sat down and talked. He's still a friend of mine. So that level, the community, getting into that community and learning changed my perspective on how to proceed. And I think we had that conversation. It's all about allowing people to grow and make mistakes without throwing and pointing fingers. I mean, the first time I tried to get into a CTF, I did terribly. And I remember Nate Berg was walking around and helping me get into my first HackerCon. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Threw down Blacktrack, trying to get in and hack into this thing. And he was like, oh, well, here, let me help. And that community really helped me. And that's really what changed my career trajectory, right? Because suddenly I was like, wait, security's fun. And I could do only security all the time. And now I'm all gray-headed. But anyway, yeah, I think that's the important part, man. It's just trying to get people to do it and to share.
I think that's I love that story, right? Because it is always that, like, hold on for a second. You mean that it is possible, right? It's magic until you figure out how the magic tricks work. And then you're like,
right.
Okay, this is doable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do a magic trick for a little kid and they're like, and their eyes light up.
Yeah.
Well, you can do that for adults too. And adults are a little more, skeptical.
Yeah.
They know it's a trick. But when you're teaching them cyber,
yeah.
That's a whole different thing.
Oh, I love it. Reminds me of this community. I'm very, very grateful for this community that we have, because I do see a lot of that community sharing and in our Discord. And that's just a reminder for everybody to hit that exclamation point Discord or anything else to go get some of that community that John's talking about.
And shout out to you, Neal, because that's how we met, wasn't it? I was trying to find somebody to help us with Secure West Virginia, and I watched your stream once, and I was like, so that's somebody I can agree with, because he's trying to help.
Yeah, I think it was, we had the conversation because we had just got done doing the Black Hat and the DEF CON streams, and we had done exactly what you had talked about with Secure West Virginia, where we did a stream. It was me and 3 other guys, and we were all doing the CTF with our community. We wouldn't tell people what the answers to the flags were, but whenever we would discover a flag, we would talk through the steps on how that flag was discovered and let them have their own light bulb moment as we kind of like walked through the steps. And I think that was a really transformative kind of experience for everybody when we had done that.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing in this community, man, is when I help somebody.
Yeah.
And you see that light bulb moment. If you get to be there for that moment, or when they come up to you later and be like, hey, that thing you taught me, that helped me. Or they come up and thank you.
All right, last thing, because I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah.
If you had to speak directly to folks right now and tell them how they can contribute effectively to community, or to see the growth of a community, or how to benefit the most out of a community, what advice would you give to folks who are listening right now about that?
That's straightforward and easy, Neal. Volunteer at your local conference. If you don't have a local conference within a couple of hours, make one. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can help build conferences anywhere.
I love it. I love it.
There's lots of people out there in this space.
You can hit exclamation point guest in chat and get access to John's LinkedIn. I highly encourage you to do so and reach out to John. John's a fantastic individual. John, thank you so very much for joining us on the SecDataOps stream. I absolutely appreciate it. My chat absolutely appreciates it. Chad, drop some love for John as we send John on his way. John, have a great one, sir.
Thanks, sir.
We will see you later.
Thank you.
Oh, I love it. I love John. John's amazing. I always did enjoy, my chats with John over the years. He's a great individual. Please reach out to John across all the social media and go chat with him. Thank you all very much for joining in today. We will be live tomorrow for Tea with a Hacker. It is Friday. We will be live tomorrow, so do make sure you do have those notifications turned on, because we will see you in the morning. That will be our Cyber AMA, where you can get any and all questions answered, as we have some nice little tea. Till then, whether you're on the red side or the blue side, or still deciding, keep learning. We'll see you next time.